welcome back everybody to Monster House for the GBA. We're gonna keep moving along in the Monster House and hopefully make our way a little bit farther down the path. Because like I mentioned, I think in one of the previous episodes, time to beat this game is about 4 or 5 hours. So right off the bat, you know that's what 8, 10, 12 episodes right off the bat. Kind of want to explore this room right now, which is why I'm killing the TVs. Otherwise, the TVs tend to be a waste of your ammunition. Why did I say fuck every enemy in this game? They're all fucking pains in my asses, and it doesn't seem like I can power my guys up high enough for them to like actually feel like they're making any progress in damaging them. Here's a thought for you guys. Okay. Word of advice. Terrible, whatever you want to call it. If you have cake in your refrigerator, don't forget about it. Because it's not going to get any fresher. And you're not doing yourself any favor saving it. Or forgetting about it. Well, I've been recently pondering this question. Okay. It's got a little bit to do with the Bible, so I apologize. In the Bible, early on, Exodus, they talk about God punishing the sinful to the, whatever, 4th or 5th generation, which brings up this idea of generational sin or ancestral sin. And later on in Deuteronomy, talks about not punishing, only punishing, or no, probably not punishing so much as a child should not be put to death for the sins of their father, nor should their father be put to death for the sins of their children. But, that doesn't mean if you're not put to death, you don't get to fucking live. And my question here surrounds entirely this concept of if you have an unrighteous person, but your son or your daughter is a righteous person. Again, this is... I kind of understand where this philosophy is coming in, because if you're an unrighteous person, thieving, stealing, adulterous, whatever, some of those, whatever, you're more likely to pass those bad habits onto your children because they're imitating their parents as their role model figures. If you're doing evil, they're more likely to do evil as well. But the way the Bible's set up, or the way the rules, laws, whatever, sayings are set up, is that that even if you live, even if you come from an unrighteous household, okay, but you yourself are righteous, you know, you're still going to experience the sins of your father, if you will. I understand it tends to do with more than just strictly religiously speaking, okay? We're not strictly speaking about, well, you know, what does God think about you as a person? And, you know, certainly the idea there is that it's also sort of mentioned right after that line, is that if you do righteous acts, then God will bless, you know, your descendants down to the whatever, I can't remember what the generation is, but it's like twice as long. It's like the 10th generation or something. So, you know, his mercy greatly outweighs his anger or punishment. So you want to, again, as a way of sort of incentivizing it, you want to, you know, try to promote good deeds. You know, your good deeds will be looked on twice as favorably as your bad deeds are. Okay? But, and again, this also gets into a cultural, you know, sort of like a whatever you want to call it, town, whatever mentality. I'm not grasping at a word I'm trying to think of, but essentially, you know, your reputation in that community, and, you know, your dad was a thief, and, you know, you're known as a thief's son, you know, because of what your father did. And, you know, you could be a good, righteous person, never steal, but you'll still, in some ways, you know, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, or, you know, what can you expect? You know, his father was, you know, a thief, so of course he's a thief. You know, again, father like son. And I kind of understand it. Is the idea is that, you know, everyone who reads this can use this to sort of say, well, I'm paying for generational sin, you know, and definitely in terms of mental health, I've often heard this subject being brought up in terms of, you know, the sins of your father, where, you know, you have generational pain that doesn't get resolved because, you know, something bad happened in the past, whatever that may be. Okay. Either it could be as simple as, you know, we're not even going to ask any questions. We're just going to say, you know, grandma or grandpap had, or great-grandma, great-granddad had issues. They had anger issues. They had depressive issues. They were anxious or whatever, and they didn't know how to deal with that. So that led, you know, either genetically or or behaviorally speaking, to be passed down from generation to generation. And, you know, you inherit it, like I said, either genetically and or culturally or behaviorally. Okay. So in that regard, you know, mom and dad or grandma and grandpap or great grandmother and great granddad didn't have, you know, the kind of therapy or drugs that maybe we have today to help mitigate some of the, you know, the bipolar episodes or the depressive episodes or what have you. You know, results in, you know, people having to take on roles that they're not equipped to or ready to handle. And in a lot of cases, you know, that can lead to where instead of the kids having their childhood, you know, to enjoy childish things like make-believe and pretend and, you know, and dolls, and, you know, they're forced to manage the family in place of a mother or in place of a father figure. And then as they get older, they get resentful of that because they didn't have an opportunity to live out that childhood. Now, you know, it depends person to person, you know, speaking as a man, you know, male, a lot of that stuff on that side of, you know, the chromosome spectrum tends to get repressed a lot, and then it comes up later either in anger or sadness or, you know, drunkenness or, you know, trying to drink away your sorrows. Because, you know, that's just how men are supposed to be. Or, you know, you've got your pride to think about, which, again, pride is one of those deadly sins that leads you to other sins. They're all sort of based off of this concept of, you know, I'm better than you, or I have the, you know, you are not a person, you're an object, you know, so I have the right to, you know, steal from you or lust after you or eat more food, not have to work as hard because I'm better than you, you know. I mean, they're all, a lot of the 7 deadly sins fall from that. Or that, you know, I'm right, you're wrong, you know, only my feelings or my thoughts are valid, sort of stuff. And that, I guess that all sort of stems from pride and arrogance. And, yep, that was a mistake. So, I just sort of think about that. I was sort of thinking about that because, biblically speaking, you know, a person, and I understand nothing exists in a vacuum, but a good person that comes from a bad upbringing should be more despised than a bad person that comes from a good, righteous household. Because, you know, ultimately, you know, you're receiving the quote-unquote generational blessings from your parents, grandparents who did right, and then you are essentially screwing over your children as well as yourself, you know, because there's a good amount of, you know, you did this to yourself. You're not, you know, you're going to pay for your own sins when, you know, at Judgment Day. But, you know, just sort of like you could, and again, this is sort of this thing where, you know, the Bible both talks about it. You sort of look at it as a literal sense as to, well, this is what it says, and also sort of as a way of maybe trying to coax people into choosing righteousness over evil or what have you. Like, you know, there's if you've ever seen the episode where Bender Futurama, where Bender ends up stuck in, I can't remember how he gets stuck, but he gets stuck in the in space and accidentally becomes a kind of a god to people that are living on his backside, and sort of learns that, you know, if you do too much for people as a god or too little, they tend to not, you know, they tend to take things either too far or they end up becoming non-believers. And, you know, you start thinking things that don't really make a lot of sense in terms of your relationship to your God. But what am I trying to say? I'm actually not sure what I'm trying to say now. But, he had a point there that something related to it, and then somehow I guess God Bender sort of floats past what is in that universe God. He talks about doing too much or too little, you know, is to do just enough to sort of guide people along the way without taking away their ability to do it themselves, you know? So, oh yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. And they mentioned this in Futurama is that sometimes, I think they do anyways, sometimes the thought that there's someone looking over your shoulder either gives people the ability to correct their behaviors or, you know, use it as a way of reaffirming good behavior, you know? That, you know, at the end of time we'll all be punished for our sin. Which it brings me to a completely different thing that sort of worries me is this worthy, you know, the concept of worthiness unto the Lord is, you know, you often hear people say that, well, you can't truly justify yourself to God because, you know, you are an imperfect being who is going to sin, and those, you know, there's no way to truly, you know, be righteous in front of the Lord, you know. And at the same time, this idea that, you know, there are, at least in the Catholic faith, there is venial sins, which are lesser sins, that are often of omission, you know, you didn't know better, or you didn't realize what you were doing is a sin, or you're doing it kind of inadvertently. Like, you know, one of the things is you always want to tell the truth. You don't want to lie to deceive people because that's not good. But, you know, sometimes the truth can hurt far more than a you know, a subtle white lie. You know, is it, you know, how do I look in this? You know, you say, well, you tell someone your honest opinion, then you think they look ugly in it. It's not gonna fly. That's not very nice, you know, quote unquote, not very nice. But at the same time, you know, you tell them you think it looks, you know, they look stunning. You're either telling a white lie because you don't really believe that, or, you know, you sort of try to soften the concept of what you think. You might say, you know, it doesn't work for you, you know. But you wouldn't even say that probably. You'd probably say something like, oh, that looks nice. You know, not really being 100% truthful with that person about, hey, you know, this is what I truly think. But at the same time, you don't want to hurt their feelings. And, you know, again, it comes from a place of love. It's not that, you know, you don't want to tell the truth. It's that you love that person so much that, you know, they make, for instance, I love, just as a quick side note, I love, you know, cartoons that are made for adults because it seems like you can take characters and remove the ego from, you know, the actor, you know, oftentimes have too much creative control in the way a character becomes who they are. But in American Dad, they talk about, you know, the idea that, you know, sometimes, you know, you want to make your partner feel good, you know, like in that episode, it was the fact that Francine had stopped laughing at every time Stan told the, you know, you want a little coffee with your sugar joke, you know, and it just, and the father-in-law is talking, or her step, complicated story, but her dad, we'll just say her dad, basically, or mother says, you know how many times your father has told me the pull your finger joke? It's like, and she's like, oh yeah, a lot. And he's like, and you know how many times it's been funny? Never. but she laughs because it makes him feel good. And that's what makes a good marriage works is, you know, burnt dinner tastes good, not good, a crappy dinner tastes good. You laugh at a joke that's probably not as funny or has lost its humor. It makes the person feel good. It makes them feel appreciated. And again, tying back into what I'm saying, this idea of, well, you should be honest with everybody all the time. I mean, that's a great, thing to do. But at the same time, we're not just logical creatures. We're both emotional and logical. So, we like to feel not only appreciated mentally, but we want to also be taken in, our feelings into account as well, that, we make other people happy and, those things help to fulfill who we are as people. And, but again, sort of tying back into what I'm trying to get at is this idea of mortal sin, and at least in the Catholic, tradition, if you die with a mortal sin, the belief is you go to hell. And what constitutes a mortal sin in many cases is something that you can do. I'm not going to say accidentally, because you certainly don't do, mortal sin is very much that exact line, is you don't do it accidentally, you're doing it on purpose. That's why it's a mortal sin. You're not supposed to sin on purpose. But, whether that be, not appropriately paying your employees and, being greedy with your money because you're afraid that if something were to change or you to make a bad business decision, the whole company is going to go under, or you'll be severely set back as a company, for a bad financial decision you made. And, or, conversely, again, this is trying to get at the point that the concept is to not pervert what is holy. But, sexual immorality, you know what I mean? this urge, this drive, to reproduce, and the fact that it's linked to a pleasure center in our brain, although we want to, obviously reproduce because it's pleasurable, but it, what I mean? But it's also important for the continuation of species, so you make it a pleasure, linked to a pleasure center. You want to do it, so you have, you give yourself more opportunities to have children. It's not like I laid down with my wife this one time, and she spawned a whole family worth of children. If you're lucky, the child, not only is conceived, at the right time, but also the child, the embryo, comes to term, and there's not a problem genetically with, or there's not a problem with either the mother or the child, that the body realizes that it's not a viable thing and ejects it, even before you realize that you're pregnant. You just out the door. And but again, the sexual immorality, what constitutes, you want to be, you want to, again, do the things that are, that you have the 7 deadly sins, you want to avoid those. But you want to do the opposite of those, which are, I think, the 7 godly graces, or there's some sort of name for them. Which are, the opposite, of greed, charity, instead of lust, purity, or chastity, instead of gluttony, temperance, that sort of stuff, But, this is sort of where you hear other religions talk about the afterlife and how, you know, your actions in Egyptian mythology, your actions will be weighed, or the sins of your heart will be weighed against the weight of a feather. So, you know, if your heart is heavy with misdeeds or sins, you're not going to pass into the afterlife. You'll just, I guess, die. I don't know. I don't know Egyptian mythology that well, but that's sort of the point is that I'm trying to make is, you know, if you exist, if you, according to the Catholic tradition, is if you spend your life being generous and temperate and, you know, doing the right things, but you happen to have a vice, whether that be money or food or you know, alcohol or what have you, you know, the tradition says that, you know, those things can be forgiven, but at the same time, if you die with that sin on your heart, that you know, you go to hell. And it just, I don't know, it just it's really hard to wrap that around your mind, because you know, not everybody's going to be a saint. You know, not everyone's going to live their life as a pious person, you know, who gives to the poor always. And, you know, I mean, obviously that's the stuff you strive for. And you want to, if you're given the option or the opportunity to do the things that you're supposed to do, like feed the poor and clothe the naked and, you know, house the homeless, you know, really should do it. But it can be very complicated in this day and age where it's, you know, not so much that you live in a small village and, you know, everybody takes care of everybody. You know, you watch out for your neighbor and your neighbor watches out for you, and you're all sort of beholden to each other. So, you know, if someone starts stealing from others, it doesn't benefit the community, it hurts the community. But, you know, become very easy to not, you know, I'm mainly talking about the United States, you know, to forget about the poor, you know, the needy, the hungry, you know, talk about, you know, instances where, you know, the auto union workers may be making, you know, six-digit salaries, whereas, you know, other people don't make, you've heard me complain about this in the past, but other people don't make a living wage and they're making six figures as, you know, as an assembly worker. I mean, great for them, but like, I don't know, man. I don't make anywhere near six figures, you know, plus benefits and everything else, you know. So I don't know. I mean, that's definitely, you know, depending on what you believe or what, you know, what is actually true that you hear on the news, you know, it sometimes it's a little bit hard to swallow, you know. And I understand, you know, it's like millionaires complaining, you know, billionaires complaining about millionaires or something, you know. Except in this case, it's like, you know, people that make $100,000 a year versus, you know, people that make several $1 million a year. So, that's my thoughts, anyways. Just, you know, the goal is to, you know, do what's right in this world. And, you know, get to heaven. Yeah. I don't know, maybe it's just me trying to justify myself. Maybe it's me seeing, you know, sort of thinking compassionately about others and sort of the trials and tribulations that they go through, because, you know, we're not strictly a logical being, we're also an emotional being. And because of that, we're influenced for better or worse by our emotion. I guess for better and worse, we're influenced by our emotion. Which allows us to do, you know, both great acts of charity, but also horrible atrocities, you know, in the name of, you know, because I felt like that. Feels good. These guys are fucking obnoxious, aren't they? Of course, it doesn't help that I refuse to turn on the flashlight with him. Got so much health now, look at this. She went from 3 health to 6 health. Yeah, that doubled her health. You know, Chowder, I mean, he had a lot of health to start with, but now he's like a straight up tank. You know, at least until the enemies start doing, you know, 2 whole pips of damage, which, you know, I've talked about in the past. But, anywho. Let's keep going!